Bringing back the blood is no different than an empty promise to torture them. Hugo knows the public needs more than an explanation, right? But I almost lost all my strength to the blood mist and had no choice but to let the saints send it to an unknown place. Then he turned away. Of course there was no saint who would bet his strength and soul to reclaim the souls of his family for the victims. Yeren is not willing to try to save more, because it hurts to see the centaur being hated when he himself has done nothing wrong. When she began to tremble and sob, Taek-su gently said that they were right to hate me. It's because I'm weak and can't protect them. Can't keep my promise to protect the country with Jian. Having a smile is like a dead person. Taek-su thanked Yeren for worrying about him, but clearly there was no joy in it at all. Yeren wanted to find a place to say more. A man's hand was placed on her shoulder. The centaur vice president shook his head vigorously, telling her not to follow Hugo anymore. The Holy Master took the victims to the hospital instead of holding a funeral because he believed they would wake up at any time. There's just no way right now. But he hasn't given up yet. Because the moment you stop hoping is the moment you give up on your wife and Captain Jaewon. Quietly arriving at the door of hospital room 808 to leave his wife's name. Taek-su's hand was about to open the door, but stopped when he heard his son's voice calling for his mother from inside. The boy's sobs of apology seemed to pierce his heart. Sung Jae lowered his head and admitted that it was his fault for complaining loudly that he was hungry. If all three of us had left the airport at that time, surely my mother and Uncle Jaewon would have been fine. The little boy hugged his pillow and said to himself the words, "What if?" Then cried miserably as tears, snot, and nose flowed back into the distance without stopping. The sound of his son's apology and calling for mom pierced the helpless Hugo's heart. In the end, he gave up and couldn't hold back the frustration and pain he endured and cried bitterly outside the hospital room. Thinking back, I should have told Sung Jae not to blame himself. It wasn't his fault. But every time he said it, he cried and couldn't open his mouth. Taek-su didn't want Sung Jae to see his father's broken face. The Star Master's words around the fire made the mercenaries cry tears of joy. But Jian kept ignoring them. So he hesitantly asked about that sad memory. Shouldn't he have asked? It's been 10 years since the story happened, so it's okay to tell. It's just that Taek-su was upset because as soon as he got home from work, he was stopped and asked to tell the story. Not to mention that the vice president boy was still crying for real. Anyway, since the blood mission has returned, we must pay off the old debt. Taek-su's eyes were full of determination as if he had already prepared a plan in his mind. This time he must destroy it once and for all. He looked at his friend and firmly said, I can do it. Inside the city, on the field occupied by the disaster, the star frog placed his big feet on the ground, looking outside with his bulging eyes. It smelled the power of the sun god and the snake god approaching. Having held the lump on my head for a long time, the blood mist was ready to wait for them to come and take my life. Its roots reach every corner. This time returning to the humans, and the whole city will definitely not be at peace. The elite force of the centaurs finished chatting by the fire and immediately spread out to deal with the disaster. Taek-su is commanding extremely enthusiastically. He must burn them all out and then leave. The level of command whispered to the Holy Master, holding out a can of soft drink to Taek-su. In the middle of drinking, someone came to call the Holy Master. Eat this chocolate to go to work so you don't feel tired. As soon as he took the candy and hadn't put it in his mouth, someone else came to call the saint and held out the food like a crypt fan giving a gift to an idol. Soon, Taek-su's hands were full of candy and cakes. These kids feel sorry for him because he had a difficult time in the past or something. But no matter how you ask, they will say no, so you will have to keep all the gifts. If you can't eat anything, let Lee Jian eat it. He put a whole box of chocolates into his mouth and suddenly heard Larry Queen calling him, ringing in his ears. She was using voice transmission to tell Sung Jae's story. And by the way, He had now used his transmission portal to go to the secret library. Thanks to the identity of the Goblin Queen Larry Queen, no one has ever discovered that there was an illegal intruder. Just now, in order to convince Larry Queen to help him, Sung Jae had to say that what he wanted to find in the magic book was the skill to summon an existence from another world, called Chu Ling. Decided to give up Gemini. But this is the temporary reason Sung Jae still stays in this church. Once he has the Chu Ling skill in hand, he will be allowed to summon entities from another world. But more importantly, Sung Jae wants to summon human souls for his mother and Uncle Jaewon, who have been lying in bed for 10 years to protect him. Not to mention the innocent people who lost their souls that day. Sung Jae wants to bring them all back. Larry Queen silently listened to the boy explain his reason for a while, then waved his hand and reopened the transmission door straight into the secret library. As soon as he saw the notice board using the identity of Larry Queen to successfully enter, Sung Jae shouted with excitement. Although she didn't ask much, just told her not to try too hard. In her mind, Sung Jae decided not to waste this opportunity. As soon as he arrived, he reached out and grabbed the sulfur monosulfide level world tree grimoire that required 187.000 contribution points, currently having just over 157.000 points. Sung Jae clearly knows he lacks points, so he gave the bracelet his sister gave him to donate to the church, in exchange for 30.000 points. Enough to rent a magic book. As soon as he successfully rented it, the knowledge of the book in his hand automatically flipped open and rushed into his head without having to read it. He quickly raised his hand and wanted to read more carefully on Chu Ling's page, the section on chatting with corpses. But digesting all that knowledge took a bit of time, and he didn't know why there was someone snooping behind him. The book in his hand was snatched by the golden light, falling into the hands of the person on duty who had been waiting for the opportunity for a long time. Just seeing the Libra boy's face made Sung Jae howl in annoyance. Yeon Shihun smiled cunningly, deliberately asking the apostles who didn't show up when the Gemini Association happened why they came here at this hour. There was no time to argue. Sung Jae yelled at the dog to return the book. But Shihu is not a gentle and easy-going guy. He plays the game of copying out 3 different rights and pretending to ask which one you need. Sung Jae was going crazy. This guy didn't know any limits and had to let himself be hot-tempered. He released more and more pirated copies of the book, baring his teeth and asking, "Are you proud to have Lee Jian's backing?" But surely Shihu wouldn't be lurking here without taking the upper hand. His hand pulled out a necklace, shaped like a Libra scale, declaring that the old tailor and his uncle were about to be torn to pieces. Taek-su raised his bow, shining brightly, aiming straight at the night sky, sending a withdrawal signal to let the army know the way back. The excited soldiers, who did not want to work in the middle of the night, immediately gathered together to take roll call and return. Team A had enough people to report. Team B also returned very quickly. Only Team C was forever silent next to the trees growing on the ground. Suddenly, in the Centaur commander's ear, a familiar moan of someone asking for help rang out. Then the entire abandoned area was filled with mixed cries. The whole atmosphere seemed to be immersed in sadness. Jian was not affected much, but looked at his friend Taek-su, gritting his teeth and tightening his grip on the bow with blue veins emerging along the path. Looking up again, he saw Taek-su's whole body burning like a torch. He has to gently remind you, my friend, you're using too much strength. Keeping a cool head is the important thing. Realizing he was going too far, Taek-su ruffled his hair trying to capture the fire he was emitting. Jian stood up, stretched, and left the place he had just sat, preparing with the elite Centaur force for whatever came. In the inner city of Belgium, where the trophies and logos of historical women were lined up, people suddenly realized where the light mist had appeared and the leaves of the trees turned red, looking just like autumn. But after being in the wind for exactly a second, the roots poking through the ground emerged and thrashed, creating a loud noise that attracted Taek-su's group to quickly look over. Unexpectedly, the crowd came from inside the dome. And the tree roots were also circling behind Taek-soo and Jian. Then giant bunches of roses crashed through the ground. They stirred everything up, and then the giant disaster jumped out of the ground like a real frog. Each person shot in one direction to avoid its reach. Only Jian lifted his head and kicked a shot straight into the animal's muzzle. Greeting without using his hands and using his feet is quite awkward, but he himself wants it that way. Are you the one who made my friend and my nephew cry? Of course. The frog didn't answer, so the dirty Jian kicked him back 10 meters. But suddenly from his feet he realized that the monster wasn't without resistance. It was smiling like someone who was able to cover up someone else's basket. Li Jian's right leg was wrapped tightly by the tentacles until the blood vessels burst and flowed to the ground. He did not feel any pain. On the contrary, he mumbled and asked, "You're not a very cheap thing, are you?" Inside the secret archive, the blonde Shihu had just dirtied his old lady's relic, and it flashed a bright light that threatened to blind his eyes. Sung Jae's bulging eyes clearly saw the image of the blood mist opening its mouth wide in an attempt to capture Jian. But the past reverberated through the lotus leaves, causing him to stand frozen like a statue in shock. Enduring Shihu's crazy laughter. "Your father and uncle will definitely die today." There, Li Jian let his leg be wrapped around him. Listening to that bullfrog babbling, either asking for your strength or your energy. Jian smiled like the most ridiculous thing in the world. The tentacles that wrapped around him were suddenly burned up in an instant. Glancing at his friend who had just fired an arrow from the bow, Jian smiled and said, "Hey, look at this monster who thinks he can eat anything standing in front of him," lifting his leg that was squeezed by the tentacles, causing it to bend and distort. Jian comfortably stomped his foot on the ground, immediately activating the super regeneration skill. From his broken bones to his scorched skin, there were clear signs of healing. Only his outer pants had become crippled. He reached out and pulled out the artifact hammer from his archive, telling it to look and see how many people hit it, and it fell apart. "It's not easy to eat a delicious meal here." Jian pointed at the bloody face as if the villain was about to be eaten. "Come on, watch out for your greedy stomach and I'll cut it clean." When he finished, he jumped up, swinging a hammer with one hand that emitted rays of energy. The amplification skill in his hand made the hammer dozens of times larger. Perfectly suited to knock on the blood mist's head and pray that it would kill its mouth. But only its skin cracked a little under the weight of the hammer. The blood mist roared and sent both Jian and the hammer flying far away. The arrow came from somewhere and went straight into its eye. Then dozens of golden arrows poured down like rain on the unfortunate child at the same time. It was Taek-soo who supported his friend effectively, so he waved his hand for the subordinates behind him to prepare the palace again. The things they shot were not arrows made from the skills of the centaurs, because the blood mist was the one who specialized in absorbing the energy of the star constellations. So from the beginning the centaur army only used arrows that were sacred objects brought to them out from the weapons storage compartment. Each person held up a bow with 3 arrows in it, let go of the string, causing them to fly away and pierce the body with blood. It more or less had to endure pain while eating the rain of arrows. So it got dirty and used its tentacles to dig up the dirt and rocks in front of it. As soon as it saw the group of people jumping to avoid it, its sharp-tipped tentacles shot forward, wanting to skewer everyone. From high above, Jian had already realized that the tree roots were really annoying, so he glanced forward and jumped forward. This time, he didn't shoot at the blood mist anymore. He summoned lime first and used rock and paper to pull it. The little girl's eyes sparkled like scissors that looked quite jagged. But when she opened her mouth to show it to the owner, she could clearly see that this thing was so cool it could burn fleas. It looked like a knife, but it was 2 halves of a pair of scissors in the hand of gardener Li Jian. Suddenly, he found the job of describing bonsai trees to be easy. Puyat jumped up when he saw a stranger coming to cut the tree's roots for nutrients. Despite its nature, Li Jian's speed was too fast. He used both hands and halves of the scissors to quickly cut through the roots right before the monster's dull eyes. Even Lime has a hard time keeping up with his master's speed. He flipped the cat and performed the spinning skill, cutting the ugly frog with hundreds of slashes at once and then skillfully landing on the ground. Lime couldn't swallow the extra scar. He was dizzy and couldn't keep up with Jian's speed, so he gave up. He continued his journey of dismembering the ugly frog without stopping. It soon collapsed right in front of Jian and the restless crowd of centaurs. Did he defeat it? I know it was made by hero Li Jian, but it seemed easier than everyone thought. Only Ta-Xu felt it wasn't right. This 12-hole monster cannot end so easily. How can the strange phenomenon of this city, specifically the creepy-looking, twisted trees still standing tall to absorb nutrients, be done? Sung Jae in the library saw his uncle defeating the disaster and had to scream in celebration. His face flushed with pride, pointing at Shihu, who scolded him not to look down on his father. But this kid had the upper hand. It wasn't surprising that something like that happened, and he even announced that the battle hadn't even started yet. Hey, do you know why blood fog is so voracious? It shook the necklace in his hand, making Sung Jae feel that there was some danger coming. Especially when this dog emphasized that the calamity could convert anything it ate into power. Shihun's hand shook the necklace of Libra's power, somehow lighting up the core of the disaster, rejuvenating all the parts that had been split by Li Jian. The centaurs howled loudly. Their cheeks were regenerating. The bloody mist stuffed its horns in and out of the hideous mold. But behind the group of people there was something more terrifying. Even Ta-Xu gasped when he saw it. Because the historical woman's barrier was being eroded by the blood mist. With Lime in his hand and the stubbornness of not caring about the world, Li Jian waved his hand and slashed the rocks to reveal what was underneath. The ground. Sure enough, as he predicted, countless huge tree roots writhing underneath were used by the disaster to indirectly enter the barrier. Its NGK howl was as terrifying as its gums being pricked, and the centaur team had no time to escape. Full of caution, they raised their weapons as the frog stomped its forelimbs down. It was like going crazy with hunger, muttering, "Food, food, I need to eat more." Her eyes flashed as she looked at the city in the distance. Her hunger for the human flesh there made Shiho laugh like crazy. Even blood mist takes time to consume an entire city. But if the barrier is gone, it's only a matter of minutes. Sung Jae's face darkened. Even if you're stupid, you know that rotten frog is about to jump into a city full of people. The blonde guy was so excited. He roared at the place, making it a more sumptuous buffet than the crowd at the airport. Picking up the lotus sentence between the blonde guy's laughter, Sung Jae asked, with a dark face, why you spoke as if you had witnessed the incident at the airport. The memories of when he was 5 to 7 years old suddenly came back when he looked across the row of seats. Saw two strangers arguing at the airport because they lost something and then wordlessly ran away. The name on the left is so familiar that Sung Jae never remembered it. So it turns out it's this bastard? He turned pale when he blurted out, "Did you cause the disaster that year?" But, in return, my stomach and mouth seemed to have something very funny going on. The blonde-haired bastard was laughing so hard that he was such a kid that he just realized it now. I'm about to die of having to hide it for 10 years. With an arrogant expression filled with an unrepentant bastard face, Shiho laughed heartily and congratulated you on entering the jackpot. It was me who caused the incident at the airport. What are you going to do? Call the police to arrest you, or do you want to livestream for the whole world to hear? Sung Jae was speechless in front of this crazy guy. But he constantly encouraged his son Libra to be the culprit who dared to touch him. My old lady, Libra is the strongest zodiac sign. Understand? He howled with joy. Who would dare do anything to the son of Saint Libra, hiding under his mother's shadow to commit such a heinous crime? Sung Jae only felt angry that this guy could callously kill innocent people. In the eyes of the noble son, 1,000 human lives are nothing, so he should be afraid. The arrogant words made Sung Jae dirty and dirty. Zainers, Dagger of Desire successfully scared the yellow-haired man out of fear. Fortunately, he was still afraid of his uncle's weapon and was still in shock, remembering the scene when Lee Jian got his head out of there. The familiar light blinded her eyes. Shiho closed her eyes tightly and screamed when she saw a head full of hair coming out right under her armpit. But the red hair that wasn't Lee Jian's was hitting his straight nose. Even if he recognized it as Sung Jae, he'd already be dead. The boy exchanged his swollen head for Shiho's nostrils, knocking him backwards, unconscious. He smiled happily. It was just normal magic light. You coward. The caster fainted, so the magic book fell to the ground so Sung Jae could take advantage of it. His eyes suddenly bumped into the thin bin powder transmission line that the young man was holding in his hand, and he simply snatched it away without saying much. This brat somehow used the chain to summon blood mist. Surely he could use it to eliminate the monster. Knowing what he needed to do was to get to Europe as soon as possible. But for a second Sung Jae wondered if it would be of any use if he didn't have both the relic and the skills. Holding hands tightly, worrying any more will only waste time. His eyes lit up with determination. He grabbed the magic tree's book, wanting to borrow its power to transfer consciousness to the desired place. If you can't do it without the Gemini badge, use the power of this zodiac magic book to activate the infusion skill. The place where the city's barrier had been removed exploded loudly under a hail of arrows from the entire team of centaurs who tried their best to destroy the blood mist. An arrow rushed back and forth, emitting hundreds of arrows, covering the entire sky. The rain of missiles crashed into the monster, which was trying to cover itself with tree roots, unable to raise its head. Playing the role of a diligent gardener, Jian also plays the cutting card game with his electric arm, which works extremely fast. Whenever he gets close to a monster, he cuts that section without saying much. His cuts cracked the house and stone before he had enough effort to skewer the fat frog's body. The surrounding area was affected, and wanted to collapse under the fierce attack. But the owner pretended to be proud and praised himself for his beautiful attack. Suddenly the ground under Li Jian's feet moved. The monster's roots shot up, begging for the gardener's left arm. His eyes filled with grime looked down at his cool shoulder, letting the super regeneration restart itself. But the blood fog that blood mist cast was like Li Jian's ultimate ability. He only had one more regeneration left before it ran out. Li Jian stood there with his arm gradually being embraced by the starlight of the snakehead star, frowning as he watched the tentacles with their hardened heads burrow through the ground. Right above the sparkling golden light, Taek Su threw his whole body into the space between his friend and the disaster, sending them flying in one move. As soon as his friend landed, Li Jian's left arm completely recovered. He clenched his fist from behind Taek Su, tensed his butt muscles, and delivered a long sweeping blow that blew away all the loose tree roots and defeated the disaster. Having bought some time to consider the situation, both friends realized that the source of the monster's power had gathered together, but he ran out of power inside the demon tower. When Sichuan Nyan's army continued to attack, revived again. 20 years ago, people said that the Devil's Tower was the scariest place because it had the invasion of the Sichuan Nyan army, which humanity said was the secret base of an unknown civilization. But one thing is clear to everyone, that the danger of the disasters inside the tower is certainly at a higher level than the disasters outside. Unlike many spider queens or thousand-legged calamities that are classified as red rank, the ones in the tower are more than black rank because they are extremely difficult to completely destroy. At this time, using his 13th sense to detect the enemy's weak points, Li Jian discovered that there were 3 glowing cores in the monster's body. One was in the middle of the trees on its back. A fiery swirl was on its belly, and the other was smaller like a stone. The strongest core at the top is to imprison the souls and lives of those swallowed by it. His eyes could also see the spreading tree roots that were luring souls from somewhere, which he guessed was the central city where the blood mist had just removed the barrier. Mom said, Jian must immediately inform Taek Su that everyone there has fainted. We must use the city to prevent this monster from absorbing nutrients. He extended his hand towards the centaur team, gathering everyone to shoot straight into the city to destroy the tree roots. But Blood Mist is a disaster with a brain. It immediately knew what the plan was, so it wrapped its roots tightly around the people wearing the centaur, where Taek-su had just burned them with fire to rescue his subordinates. Li Jian was also busy tearing them to pieces with his bare hands. The Blood Mist's terrifying scream was like a siren, calling out purple-red orbs scattered across its roots, from which sprouted countless faces in a state of moaning and crying, begging for their lives. Screams and shouts filled the air with chaos. Fear crept into the minds of the centaur team to the point that they could not resist at all. Please. The souls clinging to the team members and moaning make people scared to death. Taek-su saw it and felt bitter in his heart. That was not the soul but a disguise of the miserable bitch. In the hallucinatory scene, everyone could see the tragic scene. Even Li Jian had to curse. The frog's carefree appearance makes him angry. He really knows how to make people crazy. He decided that he had to tear this monster apart. His smug face made Jian want to vomit. In the sky of the quiet city, a twin space vortex suddenly appeared, releasing Sung Jae's red head and falling into the tree canopy, hitting the ground with a majestic sound. Libra's transmission line conflicts with Gemini's strength, so it automatically redirects the boy so he can't land properly. There was also a sudden light and an incomprehensible clicking sound on Sung Jae's hand. He looked in the direction it pointed and discovered that the horrifying thing he fell on was a huge, deformed tree entwined with hideous roots. A red mist emitted from its trees. But Sung Jae did not realize he had fallen in the right place because he thought the city was still protected. The Libra strand lights up to prevent the effects of blood mist. Sung Jae looked around for a while and concluded that he had landed in the right place. The tree is still wrapped around many people who are unconscious and still breathing, let alone just starting now. Holding the magic book in his hand, Sung Jae called out the power of the grimoire, summoning the cremation mage god from his skill, preparing to see this tree as an enemy. Soon the uproar in the Western Ring City attracted people to report. But when the cameras showed, only scenes of destruction remained. The representative of the European Union angrily roared, "That damn Shihu doesn't know what it's like to work slowly. The problem that Europe wanted to keep hidden is now openly exposed." Sure enough, the reporter reported that the blood that had appeared in the past was the suspect in this attack. News broadcasts to all corners of the world. Viewers' emotions are of all kinds. From Thien Bin, frowning seeing the bastard he met 10 years ago, to Morin happily sipping a cup of coffee and smiling. Larry Queen and Hei Jin were at home watching TV, waiting in panic. When the reporters in the drone got inside, they saw a leg wearing torn pants speeding away with a huge cargo. Father in hand, Li Jian, in his familiar ragged shirt, spent several hours with the centaur team, cutting the entangled tree root that followed him like a fat prey that wouldn't let go. While Taek-su stood below, screaming for his friend, making so much noise that he was about to receive an ear slap with his forelimbs. Taek-su suddenly had to brace himself with all his life to defend. The S-class wind-killing spider silk relic was broken in an instant. Taek-su lost his ability to resist and was crushed by the frog, vomiting blood from his mouth. Li Jian flying above saw his friend eating onions instead of rice. So he was very spicy. His blood became even hotter with the spicy roots, and when he turned to look, he immediately fell into the painful emotional matrix that the disaster was broadcasting live. In an instant, he was immediately entangled by several tentacles. As soon as his face was close to the thing imitating the unjust soul, Li Jian burst out cursing in his mind. Now he understands the disgust of those who have to witness this cruel thing. The frog grabbed him and threw him from the rooftop, falling to the crushed ground. A few centaurs who had just escaped from the tentacles wrapped around them raised their heads and called out loudly, but they couldn't see anyone. They only saw glowing red eyes of blood mist. satisfied with looking at the group of weak people waiting for him to regenerate. Without Li Jian and O Ta-Xu, the Centaur army would have difficulty resisting the blood mist. But suddenly he felt a terrible pain pounding his head. So he scowled, turned around, looked towards the western city where food was stored, gritted his teeth and climbed. There is a grandchild there who is touching an ancient tree. The pain became more and more obvious, causing him to jerk around. Because Sung Jae's magician was continuously pounding the hideous tree, hitting it with all his hatred and resentment. Sung Jae screamed because of things like this. Because of things like this, his lovely mother could no longer smile. His father lost half of his strength and the whole world turned its back on him. Uncle Jaewon was devoured right before his eyes. The helplessness of looking at innocent people lying everywhere turned into a giant mass of power for Sung Jae to face the damn logo and the damn tree. Successfully destroying the ancient tree made the frog howl in terror. Its eyes lit up and cursed all kinds of words. Then ignored the centaurs, jumped over their heads, and headed towards the western city. Each stomp of its feet scattered the ground, making the whole team realize that there was something unusual going on that side that made it so urgent. Thanks to it redirecting Ta-Xu, he was able to crawl out from the deep concave ground, stand up and shout for Gats to take the things he had prepared in advance. He closely followed the blood mist that was speeding towards the city. As soon as it touched the ground, an arrow shot straight into its head, causing it to explode. The pain locked the blood mist. It numbly let out a deafening roar, unable to turn back to look at Ta-Xu who had just let go of the bow. For a while now, he was afraid of blocking Jian's actions, so he hadn't touched the arsenal he was carrying. Now he pulled out another halberd as a gift for the monster frog. Dozens of holy creatures prepared separately for the blood mist on the bow. Ta-Xu roared, "Today I will pin your fat body to the ground like fried frog in butter." Then, the halberd was stuck in the blood mist's left thigh. Another was stuck in the right thigh, locking it on the ground. The centaur team took the opportunity to fire continuously from both sides and rain down on the disaster. All of them used holy objects. Every time they shot a shot, countless shots were emitted with bright ropes that tightened it down. Angrily looked at the group of small people holding on to the rope to hold him down. But for the time being he couldn't do anything. They had to use all their physical strength skills to close their eyes and hold the rope together. This damn monster recovers easily every time it gets injured. Right now the only way is to imprison it and not let it act. Strangely, it roared and cursed at the flies. In a few seconds, the nerves transmitted from the ancient tree felt unbearable pain. He was helplessly pinned here while Sung Jae beat him to a pulp. Now put all your effort into the final attack despite the message that the Libra and Gemini energies are cancelling each other out. He let out all the resentment that had accumulated for 10 years in this one afternoon. The S-class crematorium mage used the strength of 2 zodiac signs to smash the bond tree until the already thin protective barrier cracked, opening the mouth that was pierced by the halberd. The blood fog howled in horror and unwillingness. The city that gave it energy now exploded, escaping from the red fog, took out its head and gave it its soul. The souls roaring on the tree roots disappeared with the passing wind, returning peace to the minds of the centaur army. Sung Jae lay in the mess he had destroyed and fainted for a while before slowly opening his eyes. Next to him was a burned fire mage. Having put all his strength into the attack just now, his whole body ached and he just wanted to lie down. Suddenly he remembered the tree. The old tree that he had destroyed. So he raised his head. Seeing that it was completely destroyed, he lay down with peace of mind. The hand holding the Thien Bin transmission line felt like it had been burned, scorched and swollen as if completely paralyzed. Sung Jae didn't know if it was because he used all his strength to hit the tree like that or not. He only knew that the sacred object of Libra was gone. Well, anyway, what can be done has been done. Now Sung Jae can safely enjoy the real sky view after the dome disappears. Suddenly I feel so happy. I've succeeded. Smiling happily for a few seconds, Sung Jae's pupils reflected the giant pillar of fire just outside the city shooting straight into the sky. It exploded like a nuclear bomb. Anyone who was an apostle would receive a notification that the power of the sun god Apollo was being activated. It swept straight towards the city so quickly that Sung Jae braced himself to defend himself. Thanks to the snake scale shield of the Zanu's relic that automatically activated when there was danger, he was able to escape the blast of fire with terrible heat that passed through the whole area. City. Sung Jae stood inside the barrier and had to brace himself to stand firm. But it reached its limit and then disappeared. The lingering heat made Sung Jae completely exhausted. The feeling was both similar to his father's fire and also strange. The scene of devastation before his eyes made Sung Jae unable to believe it. The entire house was consumed by the melted heat as if it were poured into lava. The place where the army of centaurs stood also made sizzling sounds of fire. They trembled, thinking that their grandparents had to carry the burden to get through this. But it was not the celestial lord of the zodiac, Hugo Arters, who tried his best to support the group, who were now in a tattered state. His arms were severely burned. But the most painful thing was that the blood mist was still using the centaur's power to steal as if it were its own. The fire burned all the holy relic ropes that Taek Su's power had difficulty spreading. Luckily, their commander was still alive. But Gat's side was not as strong as Taek Su. So while protecting his subordinates, he no longer had the strength to fight. Not paying any attention to the crowd of people who had just dazzled. The blood fog flashed its cruel eyes, looking out into the city, looking for the human standing near the place where his ancient tree was destroyed. Sung Jae realized that it was the visionary eye, a centaur skill that his father often used. But why this energy source was completely different was strange. The beast identified Sung Jae as the one who sabotaged his power. And Taek Su also immediately recognized that the teenage leopard he had given birth to somehow appeared here. Don't say he was the one who destroyed the dome. The father was right and said it loudly. The blood mist roared loudly, demanding to devour the boy to be satisfied. It stomped its limbs on the ground. Its mouth was fiery. Its eyes were angry. It jumped over Sung Jae at a speed too uncanny for a fat frog. As soon as I turned my head to look at the source of the noise, I saw a disgusting frog rushing towards me. Sung Jae exhausted all his strength after punching the ancient tree and could only hold his head and scream like a civilian. I was afraid that this trip would cause my feet to get cold. Then my father would appear and use his body to lock the animal's muzzle. To save me just in time. Sung Jae roared when he realized his father had come to save him. And by the way, he opened his mouth wide. His strength was not enough to suppress the beast. He could only hear it cursing at the cheap archer. It opened its mouth wider and wider, focusing its strength against Taek Su's muscles, aiming to see that the situation was not good. He gritted his teeth and turned his head to look at the boy activating the fire shield to surround Sung Jae, at least keeping him safe for a second or so. As for me, I was bitten by a fat frog, bringing all the dirt and rocks under my feet into my stomach for digestion. Once again, Sung Jae watched his loved one being robbed by a bloody blast, but the barrier did not allow him to do anything. Taek Su slid inside and the rocks collided with him, causing him to faint. The fat frog got even crazier and repeatedly slapped the concrete below 2 to 3 more times to make sure before stopping. Sung Jae's eyes gradually lost hope. His father's voice was pitiful, but there was nothing he could do. The fire barrier automatically activates even if the owner is not present. If there is danger, it will not let Sung Jae surrender his life. It roared with laughter. I had just swallowed all the power of the sun god. Jian's scissors came out of nowhere. It's like a bomberang that knows its target. 2 strokes cut the sadness in half and hit the ugly frog's face, sliding along its rough skin and gliding across it. Jian crashed into the tree block above the disaster, trying to find his friend, only getting his triumphant laughter in return. Hungry for more power from the constellation Sapphire, the blood mist continued to head straight towards Li Jian, who was plowing through the soil and rocks. He furiously used his 13th sense skill to see his friend falling into the monster's stomach, roaring for him, but he didn't hear anything. Taek-su's subconscious floated vaguely as his body fell freely inside the monster's stomach. Taek-su's heart was filled with regret, and he always blamed himself for not being able to save his wife and subordinates. And even his bloody daughter was still alive. All I can do is expose the pathetic situation for Sung Jae and Yuha to see. Is it possible that everything ends like that? Suddenly, a bright light penetrated Taek-su's cornea. He opened his eyes and saw that the fragment of his power that had been taken away was being kept here. His hand pointed towards that source of energy, thinking that if he could get it, he would definitely be able to comfortably fight the blood mist one more time. But his fading consciousness and tired body seemed to pull Taek-su away. In his mind, he wondered what he was trying to fight for. Is it because family memories are gradually fading in the mind of a dying person? The photo of the whole family loving each other, taken in the park, is more than a memory for Jae-woon. Taek-su remembers his wife's excited voice and gentle smile asking him how he feels. Doesn't my whole family look beautiful? Impossible. Taek-su gritted his teeth and opened his tightly closed eyes, struggling to escape the ropes holding him. Taek-su absolutely refused. He leaned forward trying to touch it. He couldn't let it end like that. Can't die in shame. Can't see my family and Jian again. I can't let them see my weakness again. We must definitely reach for it. The power within recognized the interconnected centaur fragments starting with a small ray of light. Then the sun fragment recognized its owner. It swirled violently like a ball of fire, wanting to return to the soul of Taek-su's power. A notice board pops up constantly warning that fragments of the sun exposed to cruel energy for too long will cause certain reactions. But that was the straw that saved Taek-su's life. So he tried his best to accept it. The body couldn't take it anymore. The hand felt like it was burning and was about to be unable to absorb it when the space above suddenly shattered. Suddenly, that silhouette of someone passing by here looks very familiar. As soon as Lee Jian appeared, he roared with a frown. Hugo Atters. His mixed beak screamed loudly. There's so much work to do at home. So what are you doing all the time here? His friend's strong hand spread out in front of him, telling Taek-su to quickly hold it. His friend's trademark scowl now made him smile more happily than ever. I tried my best to hold the hand I had held on to more than 30 years ago so he could help me get out. In Arabia, 30 years ago in the desert, there was a centipede-shaped disaster that spread across the land. No matter how hard they punched, the blonde-haired young man was forced to eat sand. Walking in the desert has never been Taek-su's hobby. He threw up and vomited in less than 2 seconds when his ears heard the sound of sand being pushed up. The centipede lifted the young man's light leg high into the sky and then gave it a delicious bite. The path to the centipede's stomach is not as spacious as that of the blood frog. At that time, Taek-su was immersed in a cloud of slimy enzymes, thinking about his bitter life of never getting married, not to mention his poor life. No different from a beggar. Suddenly, there was a force that pulled his whole body upside down. The clear blue sky suddenly opened up before his eyes as someone who had just cut off the centipede's head peered inside. Lee Jian, 30 years ago, was covered in horizontal and vertical scars. He mumbled and asked this person why he wasn't dead yet and gave up like that. Hey, this is my hand. Lie down and take my hand. Uncle. Seeing the blonde guy staring at him, Jian frowned and asked, why don't you want to leave here? Since then, the image of Lee Jian in Taek-su's eyes has never changed. Still the same way, he charged forward with a frown and raised his hand at him, screaming his friend's name loudly, cursing and shouting, oh my god. Why can't you come out anymore, and why are you lying here? His friend's careless look is what makes Taek-su smile, because he always stands in front of him with a frown, but his hand always reaches out to pull him and him out of places where he thought he was dead. This part feels like love until Taek-su is thrown out looking like a beaten dog thief. Sung Jae was so scared that his father lost consciousness and couldn't wake up no matter how much he shook him. Jian activated his 13th sense and looked at his friend, realizing that it was because he absorbed contaminated sun debris but was still basically okay. Taek-Su's body is undergoing a process of eliminating and purifying the poisoned power, making Jian truly surprised. This idiot actually regained his strength while in the blood mist. So he stood up and breathed a sigh of comfort to the boy. Because his father had eaten dirty food, he would be fine after a nap. Of course Sung Jae didn't understand what dog residue his father had sucked in the frog's stomach. But his uncle didn't bother to explain further. Just this simple level won't kill Taek-Su. Just watch carefully. As for him, he picked up the garden shears and looked at the blood mist that had punched a hole in his chest. It's not dead yet. He still has a job. After finishing speaking, Jian flew straight up like a rocket, and again aimed at the monster's muzzle, bringing his power buff to a dazzling light across the entire area. Such a move cannot cut off the blood, but it is simple to pin the tip of the scissors. Li Jian smiled happily and reminded this kid that it was because of him that the whole world laughed at him. My nephew hasn't had a proper birthday yet. As he spoke, he viciously pulled the fruit down, determined to punish the unfortunate child who didn't know this. It gritted its teeth and tried to resist the attack. But Jian had already thrown himself off its head, leaving a pair of scissors that could not penetrate the skin. Summoning the artifact hammer at this time is only reasonable and accurate. Jian needs something stronger than a mattress on the scissors. Then he tapped a series of glowing lights to enlighten the beast. The blood mist howled in pain. I couldn't believe I was defeated in the hands of a human. It called out the name of the saintly snakehead like a friend, saying that I lost this game but